Well, today should be an interesting day. My sister and brother-in-law told me about some giant petrified trees out in the Badlands. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's going on out there. I'll tell you what, walking up to and onto these features sure makes my geology brain churn. What an interesting outcrop. Why, hello. I'm out here in the middle of the Bighorn Basin near Worland, Wyoming, and I want to do this video kind of where I invite you guys to come along with me and unravel a mystery. One of the things that I enjoy about being a geologist is I have people in the communities that I interact with that say, hey, I've seen this really cool thing out in the hills or up in the mountains, and I think it's this or that, or I've heard it's this or that, and they want to know, curious people. And I've decided I want to do some videos where we just unravel geologic mysteries and think like a geologist and kind of walk through how a geologist approaches things that they see out in the field. And that's one of my favorite things to do, is just walk up to random outcrops of rock and figure out what's going on. So here I am at this giant tree, massive tree. It's just cut right here in front. And the local people think this is a great big tree, and for good reason. Look at it. It's beautiful, isn't it? You can see the edge here, great big. Well, let's get started looking at some details at this particular tree here. First of all, it's sitting on this beautiful sandstone right here. Beautiful buff-colored sandstone. And I've taken a photo with my macro lens to show you kind of what the sandstone looks like. It's a beautiful quartz sandstone, primarily with some lithic fragments or rock fragments within it. So we walk around and we look at this contact, and it is quite a sharp contact, just as you'd expect a big old tree to be down here, a big old tree. And from above, it certainly looks kind of like a tree. If I just take my hand here and set it on this sandstone and feel the texture of it, it's quite nice, and I can feel that natural roughness. And I come up here and touch the sand. Up here, it feels very similar. So right away, I'm starting to think, well, this feels like sandstone to me, and it looks like sandstone. Indeed, looking at this macro photo confirms that it is sandstone and looks very similar to the underlying sandstone. That's a little unusual to have a tree that is replaced with sandstone. You can have a cast where there was a hole and filled in with sand of the tree shape, the original tree shape. But now I'm already starting to go, okay. But what else do you notice here? Look at what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing fractures right here. I hopefully have my camera on it. A fracture here with cement in it. Fracture here. And I say cement, where there's sandstone here, it feels like sandstone, and it's cemented, and it's more resistant to erosion. And look, if I turn the camera right down, you'll see these ribs poking out. And for me, as a geologist, I start thinking, well, there's cement that came in along these fractures and cemented up the sandstone a little better, with a little better cement or a little more, to hold those sand grains together and make it more resistant to erosion. So that's an observation I'm making. I'm going, very interesting. Let me go up on top here and look at them from the top. So I'll come up here and walk along the top of this tree. So I get on top of this tree or sandstone body, or I'll just call it a body for now. And you see these fractures with these ribs like we saw on the side, don't we? And I walk along right to the point, right out to the point. I'm so glad that I found out about this particular outcrop. Also, I see that this body, this tree that goes into the sandstone here, just like you'd expect with a tree. So, boy, okay, that's interesting. With the sandstone on sides, on the side of it over here, okay, underneath here, and actually, it looks to me like it's on top. See the sandstone on top? And it goes back into the hill over there. So I think there was sandstone on top of this. So now I'm starting to think, it seems to be encased in sandstone. That's what I'm starting to think. Which, of course, could be a tree, right? Okay, looking at the side of this again, if we look down, below we see nice sandstone, okay, clearly, easily sandstone, and it's pretty what we call massive, meaning I don't see bedding in it. I don't see bedding in this sandstone, okay? I see hints of bedding up here. I see hints of bedding in the sandstone here. See these little lines in here? I think that's bedding, those are bedding planes, okay? But when I'm first looking at an outcrop, I may not be real sure, so I look around some more to get more confident in my interpretation. I'm just kind of walking along and letting you think with me, okay? So let's make some observations on these other bodies. I'll refer to them using numbers 1, 2, and 3. So I come here, here's the second one, well formed, very similar to the main one. And now I see, actually I see bedding that's pretty obvious to me, okay, in here. On the other side, it wasn't so clear. Here, definite bedding, okay, that I see in this body. Now let's examine body number 3. The first thing you notice is that this body or shape is not very well developed. It doesn't have the nice tree trunk or tubular shape the other two have, and the color is more subdued. And here you can very clearly see bedding that we call cross-stratification, which is very common in many depositional environments, including river systems. Now I think I can safely say that all of the bodies are composed of cross-stratified sandstone. I'll tell you, as I walked up to this outcrop, the thing that caught me immediately, and it all jumped exactly what was going on as I came down and I started putting the picture together, is when I made this observation right here, right there. See that rounded back here? That's where this particular sand body, this body that looks like a tree, ends right here, right up against this nice sandstone right here, okay, this nice sandstone. And also I see a rounded front to it, and it made me think of concretions because it's got that nice rounded front, and I see those all the time, these giant concretions, and that's basically where cement grows within the rock, kind of almost like a crystal, and propagates out and cements up rock and the surrounding host rock, I should say, and makes it nice and cemented hard if you have the right cement. And then it weathers out as great big balls sometimes, giant balls. Okay, another interesting observation here on number 3, sand body number 3. The poorly preserved one will say, or it isn't as well formed is what I should say, is look here. We almost have a rind here. See this right here? And the shape under here. This is similar to what we see on the others, but the others are well formed and round over the top. These observations suggest to me that localized cementation created the rind we observe, and that the rounded base is the base of a small channel. In fact, the rounded bottom part of the other bodies are also very likely to be the base of small channels. I always like to ask myself, what is the age and the formation I'm observing? Well, it turns out we're in the Eocene, 50 million year old Willwood Formation. And that tells me some things. So this occurred, whatever was happening here, about 50 million years ago. It was in a river-dominated system, a lot of mud in the river system. I do know that from being a geologist, knowing this layer of rock. So that helps me, doesn't it? It gives me an advantage to know what formation I'm in. It's always important to check out the nearby area to look for clues and make observations. Here I observe a sandstone body with similar coloring and cementation to the main outcrop. However, this body has more the shape of a small channel in a river system. Also, it is encased in mudstones, not sandstone. This particular sandstone body sure has a nice tree-like shape. Notice that it has been broken up along pre-existing fractures. The end of this sandstone body has weathered out into a very nice rounded shape and reminds me of concretion formation. Note that the body has sandstone on the sides and the top, just like the main outcrop. In this area, there are several small channel-shaped sandstone bodies with similar composition and coloring to the main outcrop. Note that these last two sandstone bodies are encased in shale, unlike the main outcrop. Boy, it's been fun making these observations together and looking at this outcrop and seeing what we think and walking around and investigating the area around. But now comes the fun part, and that is formulating a hypothesis as to what's going on around here and what happened 50 million years ago. I love this kind of work. I love it, getting out in the field and doing this. So the first point I want to make in this process, and the first statement that I'll make, is that this is absolutely not a petrified big tree trunk or something like that. It's not a petrified fossil of any kind. Furthermore, it is not a cast of a big, huge tree trunk or something to that effect, okay? So why would I say that with such confidence? Well, I've drawn a little sketch here to help us understand this together. So here I show a cross-sectional view, okay? So here's a person to kind of show you, make sure we understand it's cross-sectional. This big red outline represents a potential huge log or something like that. And these blue lines here are the sediments that covered that up, okay? Covered a log up. And this is how, in theory, potentially you could make a cast. Okay. So what we observed that was so critical is that these tubes, these log-shaped bodies, were composed of sandstone. So to have a cast that's filled with sandstone, this would have to happen. You'd have a log in here that rotted away and left a big hole, and then sand came in and filled that hole. And this is really difficult to do because, first of all, it had to be covered to create this shape, this void, right? Covered and then rotted away. So how do you get sand in there? But let's just say there's some little hole or something in there and that later sand got into that hole left from the rotting log. Well, that's really tough to do, isn't it? Especially with this key observation that there's cross-stratification within here. So we noticed in Outcrop that there's these cross-stratification represented by these squiggly lines. And cross-stratification only occurs when you have relatively high water velocities that deposit these move these sand grains along and make bed forms in cross-stratification. So now it's, hey, come on. We can't put high velocity water inside a void. It's like a bubble buried in the ground like that. It just doesn't happen. There are some really cool casts, though, of petrified limbs and trees that I've seen, and I'll show you one here in a minute. So it can happen with a slightly different process. So, wow, okay, so we've made that step. We go, okay, it's not the petrified tree. It can't be. So now, what can it be, and what happened, and what is it? Let me show you another sketch. So now this sketch here to help us understand what I think is the best hypothesis as to what is going on or what happened 50 million years ago. But I have two sketches here, okay? One is a river system from a bird eye view, okay? This is the river channel here, okay? And that's a view from above. And next to it is a cross-section view of this river system. If we cut a channel across, or a big cut across here, we would see this view. And let me talk to each one separately. Okay, from the bird's view, sometimes you get river systems, a fairly wide river in this case, where the water will flow right here for a period like this, right? It'll flow down along the river. And then it'll switch to over here and do something like this. And then over here, like this, through time. We call that kind of like a braided system. And so it builds a sand body that's bigger than any individual channel. So these, when the river's flowing here, the water's flowing through this area, it makes an individual channel. And it builds a broader body of sand, shown here. So if we cut across here and look at it sideways, cross-sectional, we have sand filling in a broader system. Now I've put some little smileys here. These are little individual channels. And I've also put at the base here some sandstone here, some sand that's massive, not bedded, like we observed in the outcrop, right? Now, after deposition, fluids entered this sandstone body here, this overall body of sandstone in the river that has a lot of individual channels, and the fluid localized along one of these little channels in here. So let's say it's this little guy here. The fluid started cementing up better a little channel, and the way it kind of like a concretion formation, it just keeps going and kind of fills in a tube shape, okay, like that, as it cements the sandstone that's above it. So the base of it is kind of controlled by the base of a little channel at one time or something to that effect. And the top of it grew in a more like a concretion. And that's why we see rounded ends to some of these things. And that's how we get a rounded top, because channels don't have a rounded top. They don't fill in with sandstone with a rounded top. So what happened? Fluid with more minerals, better cementation came in and kind of concreted, shall we say, making up words here, concreted into more of a round form like that, a tube shape. And to help us think about this hypothesis, what did we observe? Is we saw small channels that were actually channel shaped, but they were always encased in, or almost always encased in muds. They weren't surrounded by sand. They were encased in mudstones, okay? The nice little channels that we saw. All the round ones that I saw, the big, nice round log-shaped or tube-shaped features, were within a larger body of sandstone. They were encased in sandstone. So I wanted to discuss these mysterious concretions just a little more, okay, so we understand them a little better. I've sketched some sandstone layers here. They could be 5 or 10 feet thick or more, whatever it is. And these sands, when they're deposited, they get buried and water starts flowing through, mineral-rich waters start flowing through these sandstones, through these permeable sandstones. And that's when concretions typically start to grow. So what can happen? Well, let me start with the fun one first, and that is, I'll have a little fossil right here, right there in the sandstone, and it provides a seed point often, or can provide a seed point for cement to start to grow around that fossil into a sphere. So it'll just sit here growing cement, and sometimes these can get quite large, okay? But that's not always the way it occurs. Sometimes these concretions, it's hard to understand exactly what they, how they start. You know, it's kind of chaotic. We just know that the minerals in the water start to precipitate into cement, They're often iron rich, so you'll have like iron carbonates or iron oxides, but there are concretions that aren't necessarily that iron rich. We've seen some of that iron color on the concretions that we were looking at, you know, these giant tubular concretions, but it didn't seem to be overly iron rich when I would break open samples. So there's the fossil case. The other case is the waters are just moving along, and randomly or chaotically, it's probably not totally random, but chaos is certainly involved, they start growing concretions, and they can be very tube-shaped and get quite long and very interesting three-dimensional shapes. And that cement just starts growing around these and creating these three-dimensional bodies. And they're often more durable than the surrounding sandstone that's also cemented, by the way, just not as good as this. And so with them being more durable, erosion leaves them behind to stand alone, and so we might find a concretion just laying out on the ground. So I promised you I'd show you the cast of a fossilized tree. Okay, so this technically isn't petrified. Some people would call this petrified, but this is a piece of tree. It's the cast of a tree. There were fractures in the rock, so it got fractured here and here, and it broke, and this is a piece of it, okay? Really cool shape. And the void, the hole that was filled in with mineral waters, quartz-rich, silica-rich waters, and filled in this void. And the void shape, the mold that was there, even preserved part of the bark texture. You can see the lines here and the nice texture of the bark. It almost looks like it is petrified wood. But then you look at the ends. Look what it filled in with. Chalcedony, microcrystalline quartz, really beautiful shapes. And you get looking in there, and there are little microcrystals, beautiful little microcrystals in there that are filling in. I guess if it had more time, it would completely fill in. There's still some little voids that are interesting shapes. And another interesting thing is, there's a little piece of volcanic rock right in here. It came out of the Absaroka volcanic field to the west, on the west side of the Bighorn Basin. Well, boy, I've enjoyed this area, this outcrop, and exploring and making observations and coming up with a hypothesis. I hope you've enjoyed this, and thank you for watching this video.